Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your Critique of the Week. It is Saturday, a rare Saturday show, March 14th. So glad you could join me. We had it's spring break here, so we went on a little bit of road trip to Dallas. We went to medieval times with the kids. Had a lot of fun the last couple of days, and just got back last night. So it's a rare opportunity to have the critique on a Saturday. Hope to have some different faces. Now, as always, what we're going to do is go over poems that were submitted to Critique of the Week. So they're things that you people have asked for us to look at and help with, make poems better. That's what we're always trying to do here. If you have any poems in the queue, please make it known. Let me know in the chat. The first two people I see who say they have poems here, that's who we'll definitely get to today. So if you have any poems in the queue, in the Critique of the Week submissions particularly, and would like us to look at them, it's always best to look at the poems for the folks who are actually here. And that's the way we do it now. We have 335 in the queue, so at some point, if you submit a poem for critique, you got to be here and say that you're there. Let's see. So Doreen Zimmerman, we got one. Let me write these down so I don't forget. That'll be a... here, let me write this down. Doreen Zimmerman we have. And George Graham. So at least two there. Zimmerman. George Graham. Okay. And let's see. Dejan Venter too. We'll do those. And if you put, okay, there we go. Venter. Okay. So that's what we'll do today. I got the list written down. Now, as always, the point of the critique is to give that really wonderful workshop experience, to let people know what we actually think about your poems. What works, what doesn't, where things are confusing, where the line breaks are. Yeah, Mary Lee said, yeah, so many in the queue. Yeah, we started. I go through phases of like letting people know that we have a critique of the week, and then I've been keeping it on the down low for like a year. So we can get caught up, and now we're just going to do it this way and let the queue be as big as it wants to be. So that's the new system. We keep changing and evolving here at Rattle as we go through. But yeah, what we're going to do is do that workshop experience. It's what makes an MFA program valuable, getting to sit around at a table, people who love and care about poetry, getting feedback on how they experience your poem. That's really what matters, what the experience is. It's really hard to step outside of yourself and imagine the actual experience that your poems produce. And that's what we do, taking a look at these poems on Critique of the Week. So we're going to start out, like we said, with Doreen Zimmerman. Let's look up Doreen first. And if you'd like to submit poems for critique, all you got to do is go to rattle.com. Up over in the content bar, you'll find the Critique of the Week page. Submit 2 poems there, and we'll get to you when you can. Make sure you're watching live so we can go to you when it's your turn. All right, looks like 2 short poems, so that's good because I wanted to get to at least these 3 poets. This is Doreen Zimmerman. She submitted these poems back in just 2 days ago, so pretty new submissions. That's one of the nice things about paying attention and being on top of things. You get to go quick. So here's the first poem, Parallel Lines. Let's take a look. And there it goes. Okay, here we go. Parallel Lines. And these are pasted into Submittable. Parallel Lines. He taps the blackboard. Tell me what this needs to be a skew line. I raise my hand. Yes. Another dimension? Yes. Take a mimeographed sheet and pass the rest, please. One, another, back. My future lost friend's fingers made more delicate than mine, reach for the last test. When I bend forward, answers come. The right angles found while plotting points on parallel lines. As if she will always sit one desk behind me in geometry, I neglect to study the slope of her lowered lids. Well, that's an interesting poem. So, because we have, we have this metaphor set up, a bit of an extended metaphor in parallel lines, and we have a scene that's pretty well set. We know we're in a classroom with a teacher talking. We're learning about parallel lines in the class, and some nice lines. It says BMPN. Let's see. I'm gonna move this around a little bit so I can see better. Okay, Yeah, and my life is right says I like the ending. Yeah, so let's read it again a little more slowly. PMB, okay. PMB's always keeping us on our toes. Thanks, Paul. Okay, so parallel lines. He tapped the blackboard. Tell me what this needs to be a skew line. So the first thing, we start out with a he, which is the teacher, but the poem's really not at all about the teacher. So that's one of the things I'd suggest. One of the really basic pieces of advice, I guess, for screenwriting or for playwriting is usually the character that's like the main character is introduced first or sort of quickly, and we need to know sort of who the supporting actors are versus who the main character is, and opening with a he taps the blackboard makes me think the poem is going to be about the teacher, and that throws you off a little bit in as far as thinking about where you are within the poem. And so the first suggestion I would make is to say like the teacher taps the blackboard. So we keep the distance from the teacher. We don't sort of draw us in to thinking that the teacher is going to be the subject. So I right away just say the teacher taps the blackboard. Tell me what this needs to be a skew line. I raise my hand. And then this part, I think that the repeated yeses felt a little redundant. I'd probably cut one of those too. Deb T says, "Where are you reading this?" I'm not sure what you mean, Deb. This is from the submissions queue. Yeah. Anyway, okay. So I think I would drop one of those yeses because it sort of feels a little unnatural. My life is right says italicized dialogue. You could. That's always an option. Okay. Take a mimeograph sheet and pass the rest, please. Somebody already pointed out the word mimeograph. It's not a word people use very often. So it makes it feel unnatural to be lumped in there. And it's a poem that's very, very simple and straightforward. So having a word, it really stands out. And similar to the way starting with he makes the teacher seem like he's going to be the subject, having this one sort of unique, unusual word makes that word stand out as if it's going to be like a bigger part of the thing, and it's really not. So I would cut that too. I agree. Take a sheet and pass the rest, please. One another back. My future lost friend's fingers, more delicate than mine, reach for the last test. So my future lost friend's fingers, we don't talk a ton about line breaks here because usually there are sort of bigger fish to fry as far as like being lost in poems. But for this one, I think that moving fingers up the line here, it feels a little bit... it's not the complete thought. It's not a unit. It's a very hard break, and the poem doesn't really do that a whole lot. So that's another distracting thing too. I would move the word fingers up to this line to make it read more smoothly. Fingers more delicate than mine, reach for the last test. When I bend forward, answers come. I really like the simple, quick storytelling in here. It's very condensed, but we get the picture of the scene. The right angles found while plotting points on parallel lines. As if she will always sit one desk behind me in geometry, I neglect to study the slope of her lower lids. And that's a really nice, I think the ending, somebody mentioned that they liked the ending a lot. I think the ending is the best part of the poem because it has the right level of detail where we get a sense of what's going on. We get a more of a connection. And because it has that, she sits one desk behind me in geometry, and then focusing on the slope of her lower lids. Those are the kind of concrete details that make us connect more with the poem. So basically, it feels like the setup of a poem. I don't really know what is what the story is, and I'd like to have a little more. I'd like to know a little bit more about what's going on, and so I think focusing on there's sort of an opportunity right here after geometry to explain a little bit more, as if she will always sit one desk behind me in geometry. You could feel sort of a parallel rhythm that almost wants to come out, as if, she will always blah, blah, blah this, and like tell a little bit of the story. Let us know a little bit more about what the connection is so we can feel more closely connected to it. My Life is Right says, I think the very specific and geometric language, skew, dimension, mimeograph, plotting points made me feel like that was more the point of the poem rather than the relationship. Yeah. Yeah. Rose Leonard says, I like the way geometry and the classroom runs through the poem. Yeah. Me too. There's a nice extended metaphor here. So it's a nice structure of a poem. What we want is a few more details so that we can connect and sort of stay absorbed. And I think just using these last 3 lines is an example of how to write, because we get a better level of detail in those lines, so then we can connect to it more. So if you get a poem, even if it's this short and condensed, if each line had sort of this level of detail, we'd feel more connected and close to it. Right now, it feels like there's an interesting, this is how the poem is, there's an interesting extended metaphor set up that we can think about. It's got a nice structure for that. It's got a backstory that matters. This friend is going away, my future lost friend's fingers. And that's a really, that's the heart. What does it mean to be a future lost friend? My Life is Right says, what do we think of the ambiguity of future loss? Because that could mean a number of things that happened to that friend, right? Exactly. So we don't know exactly. And there's a way, if we focus enough on the details in the present moment, we can accept the fact that we don't know actually how the friendship is lost or what actually happened. If it feels so clear that we're there in the moment thinking about the way these friendships go. There are people who you think you're going to be your best friend for life, and then they drop out of your life for various reasons. And, yeah. So if we're situated in the class, it's a little bit more, I think we can accept all that. And I think the poem can come together a little bit. I would like to just see a little bit more, just a little more detail. That's all. Short poems, all poems need to have a real, condension of detail. They need a lot of substance and as few sounds, as few grunts from my mouth as possible, and shorter poems all the more so. Yeah. So pack this with a little more detail is my main, and keep the focus away from the teacher. Focus through the lens of being the friend. That's my advice. Let's take a look at the second poem here. Deguchi Rush for Men. Okay. You enter my house, sweet as someone missed from unlived past. Desire deepens to know your passion. I swoon as if I should. I breathe your body, a second skin, freed from plastic frame. Spirit gushes an invitation before you understood. My lover now dead, memorized scent releases buried thought. He never, I beg for your pardon, deserved to smell that good. So again, this is a nice poem, a nice condensed, tight, short poem with a good ending. And I think the reason why we ask for 2 poems is so we can see just in general where we can help, what general patterns and what general advice you can take to other poems. And I think it's very similar in that there's a good thought behind this poem. It's an interesting structure, and but we could use more detail, and I think that is really the key that's going to unlock your poems. If we look at some of the nice short poems, look up poets like Andrea Cohen, Mike White, if for formalists, Wendy Vitalock. The poets that get really condensed, going back a little bit more, Lucille Clifton is a good poet to look at for very short poems that are very effective. But you'll always have a strong level of detail that sort of carries the poem through. And that's really the only element that's missing here. The scenes, because you have so little space, the scenes have to come to life really quickly. And they're not quite coming to life. Even though we have a good sort of a shape and a topic and an emotional heart for these poems. So and it can just be like one little detail here and there sprinkled in that makes that we can sort of slingshot off of and make the universe from. And so that would help. So you enter my house, sweet as someone missed from unlived past. So, it starts with the you, and we don't know who the you is, so we can't really visualize or picture that. That's not building the scene. You enter my house, but it's such a generic house, we don't have a way to see that at all. And then sweet as someone missed from unlived past is really vague. So for that first two lines, we don't get to see or experience anything really. You, who we don't know, is entering our house or my house, and that's it. And it's completely vague, and you can't build anything from that. Desire deepens to know your passion. I swoon as if I should. And so we still don't really have a sense of where we are, who we're talking. We don't have a visual of that. It's all abstract language with nothing sort of to tie it down. I breathe your body a second skin, freed from plastic frame. Now, if we were already set up in the first four lines to sort of have a scene set, have some kind of thing to ground us and connect to on a visual level, then this would be a nice line, but it's hanging in sort of a limbo empty space because we don't have any sense of that. Spirit gushes an invitation before you're understood. My lover now dead. And this is where the poem sort of takes off because we get some of the story. My lover now dead. Does that mean it's a ghost? I'm not sure. My lover now dead, memorized scent, releases buried thought. He never, I beg your pardon, deserved to smell that good. And there's a confidence in this last line that really works. So that's another thing to pay attention to is the voice. Yeah. Yeah. Deguchi Rush for Men. And I think my interpretation is that's a scent, like a cologne, right? Let me Google to make sure. Yeah, so that's a cologne. So you enter, so it's the cologne we're talking about. Notice how if we just said it enters my house, sweet as someone missed from unlived past, then we don't have that question, and we don't, because the you always has so much ambiguity. We talk about this all the time. But if we say it first, then we know what we're talking about much quickly. So it enters my house. I think works better. If you want to personify that, let us see it somehow. Let us experience that a little bit more. Let me look at the comments. Yeah, Matthew Scoggins says there's a big jump in time that happens that my lover's dead now. Yeah. Winston Munn says, why not scent enters my house? Yeah. But what we want are some descriptions that sort of evoke this, and it's really a great exercise to try to write in language that actually evokes the scent. So how can you describe that so we can feel it? Because I don't know what Deguchi Rush for Men smells like. I'd love to have an idea. You enter my house, sweet as someone missed from an unlived past. That can work if we immediately go to actually smelling it and having the sensation. Desire deepens to know your passion. I swoon as if I should breathe your body, a second skin, freed from plastic frame. So go in. I'm trying to think of a poem that has a great use of scents. Just as an example. So if anybody has any suggestions, pass them along. But definitely the key here would be bringing the scent to life. Again, everything is like conveying your experience, putting your experience, your imagination into my head as a reader is what we need. Chelsea McClellan says, enter, waft, drift. Think about the verbs and nouns that can be more specific to evoke the perfume. Great advice as always from Chelsea. Yeah. So what we want is just to bring the scent to life. And if we do, then it works. My lover now dead. And there is the big question of what happened, the story. My lover now dead. Is it dead to me? Or is it actually dead? Memorized scent releases buried thought. He never, I beg your pardon, beg for your pardon, deserved to smell that good. And what really works, people mention this line, the ending, it's similar to the first poem where there's a turn. Like so much is given. I think this is just a good example in both these two poems. There's not a whole lot of like detail to cling to. But having a sort of a space set up and then something happening, some kind of turn, gets you so far in a poem. And the fact that in the first poem, I neglect to study the slope of her lower lids, that's a shift somewhere. That's something surprising. And in this poem too, he never, I beg for your pardon, deserved to smell that good. That's not what we expect. That's a surprising emotion to be sharing. And that's what makes it, as My Life is Right says, the writer has nice endings, and that's what makes it nice endings. It makes it a poem that actually goes somewhere. So a good example of how far just actually doing something and going somewhere can get you in a poem. George Graham says, I can't think of a poem, but Faulkner writes sweet and oversweet, distilled and hyper-distilled, really intense description of wisteria in one of his openings. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So anyway, details. Get us some more. Just the key. And I was talking to a long ago episode of the Rattlecast, Janet Fitch, a professor and a fiction writer, since you mentioned Faulkner here, and she has a file cabinet just of descriptions of things, and just phrases, and she can pull in her file cabinet. Oh, I want to describe this, and she finds a little note. For how to describe things. She just likes moving around, thinking of ways to describe things. You're looking out the window and seeing leaves arranged in a certain way, and then how do you describe that? That's the kind of way you want to think as a writer, of how can you convey what you're seeing or imagining to someone else through words, and how can you make that unique? And that's really the key to thinking this, to bring this perfume to life. Okay, let's move on to another poet. Thanks for sharing those. That was Doreen Zimmerman from Pennsylvania, I should have said. Thanks for sharing those. And next we'll go to... Oops. Oh, we don't need the music again. There we go. The next poet was... George Graham. Okay, let's take a look at George's poems. And George has two, maybe needing some help. George says, we'll see if there's any questions. George says, anything to be cut here? Any issues with tonal consistency or control causing problems? Do these land as too indulgent? Is the voice coming through landing? Areas to tighten, word choice or imagery, so just general stuff. Is it clear, genuine sounding? That's what George asked about these poems. George from Missouri. And let's take a look. Again, these are two short poems. I Hope is the first one. Let's take a look. I hope. Stalking you on social media in my underwear. I lock the second lock. I'm doing it to pray. I hope you find someone who will close the blinds at the right time, like you like. I can't call you because I only wish you hope. And not bargaining, sweet robins raise warm feathers without seeing me. I close your picture. I wonder what the difference is between trying to help and helping. Yeah, so that's an interesting poem too. I Hope is the title. Stalking you on social media in my underwear. I lock the second lock. It's a very interesting start. It's very compelling. Stalking anybody is a little creepy. Stalking you on social media is a little better. And then in my underwear is a little surprising. And then locking the second lock is strange. So we have a lot going on in the first three lines. And then the fourth line moves it in a surprising way too. I'm doing it to pray, which is another interesting surprising turns. So see, it's a poem that's already turning on itself, and that makes us interested in what's going to happen next. We're sort of at the edge of our seat, wondering where the next turn is going to be. I hope you find someone who will close the blinds at the right time, like you like. That I'm not sure what exactly that means, but again, it's interesting. I can't call you because I only wish you hope. And not bargaining. Sweet robins raise warm feathers without seeing me. I close your picture. I wonder what the difference is between trying to help and helping. And so here, so it's an interesting start to the poem. There is like a creepiness to the stalking that carries through with blinds and things like that. But then the poem ends up going in a sort of a vague direction, and not bargaining. Sweet robins raise warm feathers without seeing me. I'm not sure what to take that. Is that literal out the window blinds we talked about before? I don't know. I'm a little lost there. Then I close your picture, and I assume that's, on social media, like I X out of the tab or whatever. I close your picture. I wonder what the difference is between trying to help and helping. It's an interesting thought, but I don't feel like it. There's a big leap to that thought that I don't think we can really. It's too far to follow, I would say. So I feel a little lost by the end of this poem. Yeah, let me see what folks are saying on here. Yeah, so Matthew Scoggins says Sweet Robins is confusing. PMB says loses me at I can't call because I wish you hope. Yeah, I lose it a little too. That's sort of the first vagueness that creeps in. This is, yeah. Okay, so George here says it's very helpful that it's unclear and the premise doesn't get there. Did George say what the poem was about earlier? Context, where's... Oh, here we go. So this was about an ex who continued to reach out to me. Okay. So that's the thing that wasn't clear. That continued to reach out to me. Because I'm stalking you on social media in my underwear. I lock the second lock. So that part is not clear. So, the fact that it was about an ex who continued to reach out to me, and that the ending makes more sense in that context. But that part doesn't get across that, it feels like it's the other direction. Yeah. Yeah. Well, to highlight the lines that are most interesting, I lock the second lock, and I'm doing it to pray. Those are really two interesting lines, and so more of that. That's the kind of stuff that works, especially if you help provide a little bit more context so we know what's going on. Yeah. Yeah. And Deb T says maybe a different title could give context. Yeah, the I hope the I hope comes up here, and then it sort of is repeated here. And I think that a title that explains what it would be. I mean, even a title is what did George say again? He said so my ex continues to reach out to me is the title. My ex continues to reach out to me. Stalking you on social media in my underwear, I lock the second lock. See how already we get a sense of place. That reminds me of a poem. This is a good poem to look at because we're looking at specific details. Talking to the first poet too. Don't leave just because we already talked about your poem, Doreen, because here's the kind of detail. What was this poem called? Rattle.com. What was this poem called? It was just the poem of the day. The title. Oh, man, I'm drawing a blank on the title here. Let's see, site. Hang on one second. Just bear with me. Site rattle.com, and then It's like how she describes her ex-husband when the police called. Okay. So here is this poem, How She Describes Her Ex-Husband When the Police Called. And this was a Rattle Poetry Prize finalist way back in 2008. I think, or maybe not. I think it was. I think we just don't have the note there. Anyway, notice how we get the background story, we get the context just in the title, and how that allows us to... And you know what I should have done is not shown you that and started reading the poem. And to show how much... if you just have, he's the man who wants to live on Park Place but could only afford Virginia, the Pennsylvania line running through his backyard fast as a chance. If we didn't know the context of how she described her ex-husband when the police called, then this wouldn't make any sense. And even though there are interesting lines, you wouldn't have anywhere to put those interesting lines to make meaning out of them. But now that we have the title, How She Described Her Ex-Husband When the Police Called, and really the ex-husband is the key to let us know who the he is, who we're talking about, and sort of a hint at the character through the police being the ones calling. But now the whole thing makes sense. So first of all, that's how much context can do. So and you can just do that in the title. If it's a poem that's going in places that are sort of more surreal or obscure or strange and surprising. If you just give it a title where the whole thing is explained there and the context, then we can appreciate everything going on. That's the way that a poem can work. So the title can do a lot of work. But let's read this. And this is the kind of detail too. Once we know the context, the detail really works. So he's the man who wants to live in Park Place. Okay. He's the man who wants to live on Park Place but can only afford Virginia, the Pennsylvania line running through his backyard fast as a chance. He's the hat who owes a luxury tax. He's a no-trump bid without all the aces, a queen finesse, 8 overs, 9 never, that fails to fall into the dummy just right. He's a down trick. Just call him Colonel Mustard, pinning Miss Scarlet against the conservatory wall, but rubbing noses literally with Mrs. Peacock endowed by her old money. He needs cash and carries a lead pipe. Slow to ante up, he's jackpot dreams, quad or flush, scraping the felt for another card, odds turning on the river. He's a bluff on junk. He's the joker pinned in bicycle spokes, vanishing down the street. So because we know the context, and notice how all those... we're moving through, metaphors of, different games. We have the Monopoly, we have poker, we have Clue, is ways to describe the husband, who probably has gambling problems. We can surmise from this poem, But notice all the specific details within that. He's the hat who owes a luxury tax. It's a very simple line, but there's a lot of visual there. There's a lot of reference there. There's a lot to grab onto there. He needs cash and carries a lead pipe. Like that. Those are really concrete details that describe the husband, the ex-husband. And because we know the context of the poem, this list of details and metaphors, a way to describe how she thinks about her ex-husband, really comes to life, especially at the end. He's a joker pinned in bicycle spokes vanishing down the street. Just what a great description of somebody. And because we know if we didn't have the context, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't add together into a meaningful poem. But because we were provided the context in the title, it works. So that's a good example to take a look at. And if we look back at this poem, I hope, if we had a title that did that, another way to think about it is it would give us a lot more leeway to play if we know the context with everything else that goes on in the poem. Because we don't need to be given the context slowly. We can just be given it in the title. Yeah. And My Life is Right points out there's also no I. It's truly focused entirely on the ex-husband. Yeah. Okay, let's take a look at the other poem too. How Real is Sudan? So already that's an interesting title. More interesting than the first title for sure. How Real is Sudan? This remote sucks right now. They say Haitians are frying dogs, peanuts on my shirt, the earth burning and flat. Those run mouths who don't run sweatshops. I only have the faces in front of me, Desmond. I can't count. I tried the off-screen heartbreaks. The world is longer than my couch. Maybe the truth is out there. Does it fit in 2TB? I haven't gotten the RAM to run it. My recycled Lay's packaging might have been miracled by chained-down saints who have eyes on every last particular crumble, or who give dunce cap merit badges for thinking it all. Well, I've got blood to burn. Eagle Scout me. So this is interesting. There's a lot more tangible content here, and this is more like the how she described her ex-husband poem, the one we talked about. Did I mention enough? That was by Martha Clarkson, by the way, Martha Clarkson. But this poem, the second poem, has a lot more detail in that way. What's really missing to me, I think, is the voice here in the music of that. Do you notice it was difficult to read? I stumbled a lot more than I would reading other poems that we published cold. How real is Sudan? This remote sucks right now. They say Haitians are frying dogs. So the start, I think, is really good. It gets kind of clunky, and we lose the sense of who's speaking to who. One of the big pieces of advice that I like to give frequently is to actually imagine your poem being spoken from someone specifically to someone else specifically. That really helps with a voice. And as long as you're doing that, as long as you're saying something that someone or something might say to some other one or thing, then the poem will have a consistent voice. But here I feel like it loses that. This remote sucks right now is a very specific kind of voice. There's a cadence to that. There's a vernacular to it with the sucks. There's a sort of a mood and a personality to it. This remote sucks right now. I think you want a period there by the end, just a small. We need some punctuation there, but because we're using periods later in the poem. But I think that's a nice start to have voice. But who was this? Like, who is this? Me, the writer, the speaker, sitting on a couch talking to you, the writer or the reader. Like, imagine a specific reader. Is that who it is? Because that's sort of how it feels. Like you're explaining, your life to me, me, the one who reads this, and as long as you keep that in your head, is I'm actually talking to the person who's reading this, and that works. I mean, that's the way. If you look at Bukowski's poems, most of Charles Bukowski's poems have that voice. It's like, I'm just being frank with you, reader. This is what we're talking about, and it's like he's talking to you at a bar or whatever. And the first two lines have that kind of voice that it feels authentic, and then it sort of breaks down. Peanuts on my shirt, and that's where it goes. So they say Haitians are frying dogs, and we're referring back to that 2024 election thing, whatever you want to call that, with the Haitians. But then we move away from the voice of just talking about that to peanuts on my shirt, the earth's burning and flat, those run mouths who don't run sweatshops. I think we're maybe missing a who, those who run mouths. I don't know. I think that's what the shirt says. I have only the faces in front of me, Desmond. And so I don't know what this is. We just lose the sense of who you're talking to. Note how different it is in that this remote sucks right now. They say Haitians are frying dogs, how different that is. How there's a sense of when we get peanuts on my shirt, the earth's burning and flat, and how it starts to be difficult to read and you trip up over that. Maybe we'll look at. Sorry, I don't know. It looked like YouTube dropped for a second. Yeah, let's pull up. Here, let's pull up a Bukowski poem. This is from Rattle, a really old issue of Rattle. We had a bunch of Bukowski poems in the early days of Rattle. Because Jack Grapes, I believe, was like the literary executor or did something. He had a bunch of poems that he was trying to publish and sent us a bunch of poems after Bukowski died, I think. if I remember right. Anyway, this is writing. And note, just pay attention to the voice. And he starts out with a you. This doesn't have the you, but there's a sense of the you being spoken to us. Okay? So, here we go. Writing. Writing. You have to wait until it hurts, until it clangs in your ears like the bells of hell, until nothing else counts but it, until it is everything, until you can't do anything else but. Then sit down and write, or stand up and write, but write on into it, no matter what the other people are doing, no matter what they will do to you. Crash the lines down, a party of one. What a party, sworn by the light, the time of the time, out of the tips of your fingers. That was back in 1995. But notice how it stays in that voice. You have to wait until it hurts. He's talking to you, which is the person reading this, about writing. And we know that the whole time. And he's speaking in a voice that does that the whole time. You know, the voice stays consistently. I am me, the writer, talking to you, the reader, reading it right now about writing. And that's why it feels intimate. That's why it feels connected. That's why it feels consistent. And that's what's missing in this poem that otherwise has a lot of nice detail. Let's take a look at the other poem I have online, because I should add some more of these. I think we have like 4 more or something in these really old issues. Anyway, what can you do? There was always somebody to chop the wood for you, to speak the ways of God. There was always somebody to kill the meat, to unplug the toilet. There was always somebody to bury you. There were always the animals with the beautiful eyes, and there are always the gossips like Stanley leaning toward me and saying in a soft voice, do you know that at the end of his career, Saroyan had other people writing his stuff and that he gave them 25%? This was supposed to make me feel good because I was a starving writer, and the rejects were arriving in endless numbers. It didn't make me feel good. There is always somebody to make you feel worse about the human race. There is always the dead dog on the freeway. There is always the fog full of cutting blades. There is always Christ drunk in the tavern with dirty fingernails. And so see, again, the consistency of the voice is what makes, in a really, I mean, you know, there's a very casual way, a very haphazard use of line breaks and punctuation, you know, but we get a sense of who is speaking. And in this case, it's not the same sort of direct address. Here it's sort of Bukowski talking to himself out loud in your presence. But it's a consistency again. It's the consistency of that voice of somebody speaking to somebody else, or you know, through the whole poem in a way that's authentic, that makes the thing work. So that's some advice, yeah. Let's see. And we'll go back to here. And so this poem starts out that way. This remote sucks right now. They say Haitians are frying dogs. And then if you said, you know, and I'm not exactly sure what the peanuts on my shirt says. I think, you know, is it I'm confused by that. Is it the cartoon peanuts? Is it actual peanuts like the food, like the nut? I'm not sure what it is, but whatever it is, say, you know, there are peanuts on my shirt. It says this, you know, if you stay in that voice where you're describing it, a lot of the stuff will work a lot more. I have only the faces in front of me, Desmond. I don't know. I don't understand that reference either. I can't count. I tried. The off-screen heartbreaks. The world is longer than my couch. I really love that line. The world is longer than my couch. That's probably the best line we've seen today. I like that a lot. The world is longer than my couch. Maybe the truth is out there. Does it fit in I think that's terabytes for TB. I haven't got the RAM to run it. That's another nice line too. I haven't got the RAM to run it. My recycled Lay's packaging might have been miracled by chained down saints who have eyes on every last particular crumble, or who give dunce cap merit badges for thinking it all. Well, I've got blood to burn. Eagle Scout me. That's another great line too. Eagle Scout me. So a lot of great lines in this. Just the consistent voice. Yeah. So George says actual peanuts I spilled. Yeah. But so really, I think with both these poems, George, the key is just that. You know, tell it like you're, because what it is you're, when we hear a poem, it's like a poet is confiding in us. It's like they're either a friend or a angel or something whispering secrets into our ear, and having that feel like a real experience is one of the things that really makes a poem come to life. And so having that voice be consistent. And if you look at this poem too, which we keep bringing back up, but how she described her ex-husband when the police called the whole time. And somebody mentioned, there's no I in this poem because it's the voice of using these sort of, in a way, ridiculous metaphors and over the top because they keep going on and on. But using these metaphors to describe the ex-husband to the police. So it's the speaker talking to police, explaining who to look for when they're trying to find her ex-husband. And that's why there's a consistency in the voice. That's why we can get through the whole poem and have it be interesting without using I at all, because it's consistently framed in that way. And so if you think about that, who you're talking to in your poem, then this poem, because there's a lot of great lines in here. So and there's a lot of interesting content. So anyway, that's my advice for that one. And thanks for sharing. Again, that was George Graham from Missouri sharing those two poems. Let's take a look at the next poet we have, and I believe it's Dijon Venter. Let's see if we got a poet there by that name. Yep, okay. So 2 poems here. These will be the last 2 for today. Dijon Venter from ZA South Africa, right? All we get is the country codes on Submittable. It's Western Cape. I think that's South Africa. ZA. Let's take a look at these 2 poems. Cupid's Curse and Stagnation. And these are a little longer, but short lines. So we'll see what we've got here. Cupid's Curse. Always the bridge, but never the destination. The composer in someone else's loving song, the silence after introductions, architect of love, blind the lovers, laying foundations for a house I'll never live in, bricks of hope, mortar of sacrifice, rooms filled with laughter, hearths of intimacy, halls of connections, doomed to run down a hall that has no apparent affection. I stand in the wind, hands still warm from shielding the spark that others dance around. They call me kind, they call me wise, they call me genuine, they call me perfect, but they never call me mine. My heart is a compass I lend to the lost, but it always points away from me. I trace constellations and conversations, reading signs, catching glances, only to be the map that leads to their treasure. And I smile, I always smile, because their happiness is genuine, and mine is a quiet bruise I carry with grace. Sorry. I wish them well, but still I wish it were me. At night, when the noise dies down, when the owls take the crown, when there is barely a whisper, barely a sound, I wonder, is there one for me, a spark in the dark, that wants me to be its flame, an emblem I can forge without fading? Is there a fire that wants me at its center? Or am I just a spark to the camper, brief, beautiful, brief, a means to their raging inferno, never to burn one myself? Cupid's curse, born to bring together, doomed to never find it. To find the one thing you take everywhere you go, but never bring back home. Love, doomed to give it, doomed to grow it, doomed to never find it. So this is an interesting poem. There's a really nice sense of music in the language. It was really easy to read, and a great sense and ear for repetition and for the sounds of things. So that's the real positive of the poem. Again, so many poems, and we repeat ourselves on Critique of the Week so often because this just happens so often in poems. There's a distance and an abstraction that ends up having poems don't connect as much as they could because of that. And there's still a little bit too much there. We can sustain it if we, condense the poem and it doesn't go on too long and doesn't leave us too far in the distance. But I think this poem does in some points. Let's read it again with an eye toward that, about where it's working as far as connecting and where it's not. So Cupid's Curse, always the bridge, but never the destination. The composer in someone else's love song. First of all, I think Cupid's Curse is a good title. I hadn't really thought, maybe this is just part of the myth. I'm not great with myths, but is it a new sort of take on the myth, or is it just part of it that Cupid can never fall in love themselves, or himself or herself? Was Cupid a boy or a girl? I don't know. Either way, is that a new take on it to highlight that, or is that part of the legend? In a way, it doesn't really matter because it's something I haven't, reading millions of poems, haven't read about before, so it's interesting to me nonetheless. But the title Cupid's Curse works. But I think, make it the title. Don't make it the first line of the poem. So drop that comma and start the poem later. Always the bridge, but never the destination. It's an interesting comparison there. The composer in someone else's love song, the silence after introductions. Those are great details. If the poem is concise and stayed there, and we could make it work, and we don't have to add more about the speaker. It continues, architect of love, blind to the lovers, laying foundations for a house I'll never live in. So here we introduce the owl. And once we introduce the I, that becomes, if we stick to Cupid and we describe Cupid and we use different ways like this describing Cupid, that all works. Once we introduce the I as a speaker, specifically someone we're talking about, the speaker's voice, that's when we sort of need more details about who the speaker is and what's going on and where we are. My advice really would be which is unusual, would be to just cut it and keep it about Cupid, and let that be implied that it has personal significance, and let that come through the poem just in the way you describe Cupid. I think that makes for a stronger poem than introducing that I. But anyway, for a house I'll never live in, bricks of hope, mortar of sacrifice, rooms filled with laughter, hearths of intimacy, halls of connection. So here, the abstractions and the, up here, it's interesting and surprising and different, and we move quickly through it. Here, we start to get a little bit redundant and repetitive in how we're describing this. The rooms filled with laughter, hearths of intimacy, halls of connections, doomed to run down a hall that has no apparent affection. I stand in the wind, hands still warm from shielding the spark that others dance around me. So the poem comes back to life again here, I think, because this is a nice metaphor with the spark that we get later. But really, I think this second stanza is mostly just sort of spinning its wheels and getting stuck in the mud. I think that's a cut. And I still would not use the I and just describe Cupid. So Cupid stands in the wind, hands still warm from shielding the spark that others dance around. I would just stick to, they call him the kind, they call him wise, they call him genuine, or her. I still don't know if it's the gender. Anyway, they never call me mine. My heart is a compass I lend to the lost. And this is where a compass I lend to the lost. That is a beautiful sentence. The ear for music that this poet has comes out really strongly in lines like that. And again, poetry is the dance of phonemes on our tongue, within our mouths, and my heart is the compass I lend to the lost. There's a movement to that, which is the beauty of the music of speech. So that's really nice. But it always points away from me. I trace constellations and conversations, reading signs, catching glances only to the map that leads to their treasure. And that's nice too. So this whole run is really good. And I smile, I always smile, because their happiness is genuine and mine is quite a quiet bruise I carry with grace. And so we get a little bit, I think when the I comes in, it gets dull. I wish them well, but still I wish it were me. At night when the noise dies down, this stanza is not really working. But then it picks up again. Notice again, it's when we get more detail that it picks up again too. At night when the noise dies down, when the owls take the crown, when there is barely a whisper, barely a sound. I think you need it's a sentence fragment there. I would not have a period there, but that's a small point. I wonder, is there one for me, a spark in the dark that wants me to be its flame, an emblem I can forge without fading? And, the forge without fading, another great use of that sound. It's not as much the the alliteration of the Fs. It's the or going into A off of that makes for really beautiful music. Is there a fire that wants me at its center? Or am I just the spark to the camper? See, a spark to the camper is great. This extended metaphor of the spark, because it's extended. If we just had it, is there a spark in the dark? That is a little cheesy, but because we extend it to the spark to the camper, beautiful, brief, a means to their raging inferno, never to burn one myself. Cupid's curse, born to bring together, doomed to never find it, to find the one thing you take everywhere you go, but never bring back home. But then we repeat it here, so I'd cut this too. But my main advice for this poem, call it Cupid's curse, focus on Cupid, don't bring in the I, describe Cupid, and you can, and that allows you to, if you're thinking about it as describing Cupid's curse and Cupid, that gives an opportunity to bring Cupid to life more too, as an actual character, describing Cupid some, letting us see her or him, and is a real sort of entity, a real person, and that's really interesting too. So I think that's the place I would go with this poem. Let me see. I've been talking a lot without looking at the comments. Yeah. Yeah, Dejan Venter says, I compare myself to Cupid, always bringing together even people that I once loved, but never finding someone of my own. Yeah, I mean, that's explicitly told in the poem. We know that. And I think, I just think it's weaker for that, because that's another thing where you could, in the title, explain that a little bit and say, this is a metaphor for me. I think we get that, though. I think we could get that if we just describe Cupid. There's a reason why you're writing this poem. And I think if we stick to Cupid, that lets us see it more clearly and also feel that leap on our own, I guess. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. Let's take a look at the other poem. Again, these are two by Dejan Venter from South Africa. Stagnation, the Killer of Hope. And again, the title of the document is Stagnation. There's no title here in the poem. So I'm not quite sure how to take that. I guess that, we should have it drop down since this is capitalized. It seems like that's the title, Stagnation, the Killer of Hope. But when you're submitting poems, this is what it's like to read submissions. Like when, we don't really know what the title is or where the poem starts or things like that, where we're lost to it a little bit. So, make that clear to somebody who's just opening up the page. Stagnation, the Killer of Hope. Willful to live, scared to die, striving to reach the end, trying. The enemy of progress, the friend of guilt. Funny how we perceive time when we lose what was right in front of our eyes. How, when we realize the inconsequentialism of ourselves, we try to defy the truth. Maybe I really am meant for this. Maybe I've reached my mountain. Maybe I've turned into Sisyphus. Maybe Sisyphus has guilted me into bearing this burden. Has it all been a lie? Has my own mind blinded me to the light? Have I walked down a cave, mistaking a lantern on the wall for the light at the end? Have I inadvertently doomed myself to drown in my own means to an end, to see the waves but never sail on the sea, to never truly be free? Have I wasted my chance? Have I looked as the bus passed by? Have I sent myself to a grave dying to cry? Have I dishonored my future? Have I locked myself in a prison, convincing myself it was a park? Maybe that's just it. Parks have fences too. The only difference is a park envelops its walls, lying about what it truly is, a prison. A prison I willfully enter with no plan of home. Pretty plants hiding concrete floors, knives and forks seen as thorns of roses. Bundles of leaves, actually barbed wire in the breeze, chirping of birds, the ticketing of guns. Was I born to this? Was I born to be the planner of my park? Was I born to share my park with me alone? To never hear the laughter of my children, feel the touch of my heart, to have a panic, Picnic, sorry. To have a life, to feel satisfaction beyond crying. Am I actually in my own park, or the architect of others, denied access to designing my own, to watch from the fences the beauty of my creations, enjoyed by others, but never to be my own? Yeah, so this poem is one of those poems that, yeah. Yeah, our VidNote says, I think that's, anyway, I think it would be better, I think I would like this better if it wasn't framed as questions. Matthew Scoggin says, a little too much repetition, only need one of the halves. Too much me, says Mary Lisa. D diminishes, and yeah, it sort of goes on with all this repetition, with all this eye focus, without like the storytelling that brings poems to life. And so Desi Cochrane says this poem and the other feel a little too self-gratifying. I think that's why the first one felt better when changing the subject Cupid. That's a good point. And Mary Lisa too said, where did Mary Lisa go? Mary Lisa said, yeah, I think maybe some poets today could devote more time to reading published poems. No disrespect meant here. I really agree with that too. That there are a few poems that have this kind of structure, and there's a reason for that. It is repetitive. It gets monotonous, and it feels sort of self-indulgent, as people have pointed out, to have this constant talk to myself going on. And so I'm trying to think of there's some poems that have lists. What was this poem? Do you have the poem? Here's a poem we can look at as an example. Do you have the poem? Do you have your river poem? Do you have your ditch poem? Do you have the one with the trenches? Do you have the poem about puddles, the one about the waters, the one that flows back and forth to find its own level? Do you have the one that tells about the deep hole, the poem about the hollowed out well? Do you have the poem about the mass graves and the dirt pushed aside? Do you have your ocean poem? Do you have the one that leaves me drenched? Do you have the poem that fills my lungs with fluid, the one I dive into? Do you have the poem that I fall into? Do you have the poem that buries me? Do you have my death poem? So there's a poem from Rattle number 26 that asks all these questions, but notice how it doesn't, their detail still, even though it's having this repetitive questioning structure, it's still river poem, ditch poem, trenches, there's the puddles, there's the one that flows, the one that finds its own level, there's the deep hole, there's all this stuff going on, even as it's asking questions, and it's not self-focused like that. So it still has the kind of density of detail that poems have. And that's what we need still, even in a poem like this. So in stagnation, willful to live, sacred to die, striving to reach the end, trying, the enemy of progress, the friend of guilt. There's no details here. There's no ditch. There's no river finding its own level. There's no stuff like that. We need that stuff, that concrete detail to make the poem work. And, and that's really what's missing here. And then it goes on sort of too long by that. It picks up a little bit. Have I wasted my chance? Have I looked at as the bus passed by? Those the bus passing by, we start to get a sense of a scene. If it was more just like that, have I sent myself to a grave, dying to cry? We go back to the abstract. But if we had stuff like this, like the bus, and that was part of the questions, you could fit a poem into this structure. But we just need so much more detail and storytelling. Even in an abstract poem that doesn't tell a straight narrative type story, we still need a story emerging out of it, a sense of the place that we're in, And there's too much vague abstraction in this poem. I think that's what Mary Lisa was getting at. But still, we do have a good ear for language and music, so that's a good aspect of it. All right, so I hope this helps all three poets who participated today. Thanks for sharing your poems. Always a pleasure to go over and take a little break from the usual work and talk about how to make poems better. The goal is always to help with it. Now, before we go, I'm going to let everyone know a program note. So Lisa Wells was supposed to be the guest this week in the Rattlecast. She had a family emergency, had to reschedule. We'll do her later in the spring at some point. Instead, the guest this week on the Rattlecast is going to be Nick Lance, who won the Neil Postman Award for Metaphor this year for his poem Dolorimetry. We're going to ask him. I was going to ask him on later, but I thought, hey, I'll just ask you on today, and he could come. His newest book is The End of Everything and Everything That Comes After That. He's also had several books published by Grey Wolf Press, won some prizes, really well-regarded poet, in addition to winning the Neil Postman Award for Metaphor. So really excited about this episode coming up with Nick Lance on Monday. The prompt for this week, if you haven't written your poem yet, or if you had, you could write a second one. The prompt for this week was to write a poem about a time you couldn't keep the correct time straight. Include at least one temporal shift. That is the prompt for this week. The guest for this week. Hope to see you there. That's Monday, March 16th, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope you have a great weekend. We'll talk to you later. Goodbye.